My name is Zakia Ringgold. I happen to also be the organizational director for BCALA, and they said, hey, you seem to be okay with project management, and could you share some tips and tools with our membership? And I was happy to oblige. I will tell you that I am a consummate person who says, do as I say, not necessarily as I do, because a lot of times when we get down to it with project management, there are some principles that we know, but then when we're in the thick of it with the projects, things kind of go a little bit haywire. So really the purpose of this is to make sure that you have just a basic understanding and a grounding in best practices for project management, and then also some tools and some tips for you to use to get organized. And Ashlyn is saying, I'm joining from the ancestral and unceded homelands of, I cannot, oh, Vancouver. Thank you. Very good to have you. And Gwinnett County, says Lori. So what we're going to do, and generally the way I like to start these is just kind of going over the lay of the land and what we hope to cover, and then open it up to questions at any point. And then if you have questions, do feel free to just raise your hand. I will be able to see that. I'm going to pull up the participant panel. There is a raise hand feature below. There's also a Q&A feature. So they will flash on my screen so that I know you have a question. And I'm just going to get right into it because we only have an hour. And like most projects, it's never enough time. So what we're trying to cover here is really understanding what is meant by the term project management, and some of the common pitfalls that often occur that take a project off track, and then some critical steps that we all need to take when we are trying to manage projects. And then we're going to do a very high level view of just 3 tools that will help you to stay organized with your projects, and then how you can get started with tracking it and just making small goals for yourself as you are starting out with your project management. So I always start with a definition because I think it's a way for us to say, what is it that we're talking about and what aren't we talking about? And that's such a valuable lesson aside from a definition, because that's truly the crux of what makes a project successful or not. Do we know what it is that we are working to? And do we know the resources that we have in order to make that come true or make that a reality? So project management, the way it's defined by the Project Management Institute, is something that is a temporary project. It's defined with a beginning time as well as an end time. And therefore, there are scope issues and there are resource issues that go along with it. And a project is unique in that it's not a routine operation. So the things that you do on a daily basis, that's not really considered a project. A project has a defined start and end time, and it has a specific set of operations designed for you to accomplish a singular goal. So in the chat, how many times have you started a project and it ended up going, it started this way, but then eventually it started to just kind of just creep out further and further, and it's like I don't even remember what we were starting on with the project management. I will tell you that you probably are not the only one who has experienced something like that, because that is typically known as scope creep in projects. So it's so important that when you are in a project or doing any kind of project management, that you define very early on what it is that you are working towards, when you're starting it, and when is that definitive point that it is over. I love how there's a term for that. It's called scope creep, Bryn. And as you are interacting with individuals, and I have some stories I can tell where I have allowed scope creep to come up, and what ends up happening is you get very far off track, and it's very difficult to get back to even accomplishing what you started out at, because with scope creep means you need more resources, you need more time, and those milestones that you have initially set out because you had one idea in mind become very difficult to achieve. So that's how it's defined. So in the chat, I'm going to get you guys to participate here. Where do you think most projects run into trouble? Where do you think, if you've been involved in projects, where have you typically seen that a project either doesn't work as expected, or um, it was just, it didn't turn out the way you thought it would? Elizabeth says the cost. Exactly. Joyce says the planning stage. Unclear changes, says Regina, for sure. All of those. Yep. Any others? I've noticed often perfectionism gets in the way. The project, I wish we were in meeting format because I would love to hear some of what you're saying. The project will be finished, but people want to keep working on it until it's perfect. Defining what the project is, says Monifa, amount of time that the tasks take. Yeah, you start off thinking, oh, I can get that done in 10 minutes. And you look up, it's an hour later, and it's like, wow, where did the time go? Proper communication, workflows. When participants have different ideas of what the goal is, yep, and we're going to talk about that in the planning phase. Getting off the ground, passing through the idea stage through admin. Dissonance between ideas and implementation. Yeah, so this was my idea. It kind of felt like it got shut down, so I'm disconnecting from this project completely. Change in the original plan. We are all going to learn that term, scope creep, so when it happens, we can say, hey, this feels like a little bit of scope creep. This is changing. Can we renegotiate what that project is? Last minute changes from supervisory staff. Yep. All of the above. So I may not even need to add on to that, but generally, some of the common pitfalls of projects, and I think most of you have hit on all of them. Lack of a defined scope. So where does this project start and where does this project end? An inadequate project plan, you are going to find that even though it's time consuming at the beginning of a project, it is so imperative to be as detailed as possible. And that is in terms of what the project is hoping to achieve, how many or what kind of resources are being allocated for it, what are some of the critical tasks, what are some of the milestones that you are going to be able to use and identify when you are hitting those goals. I heard somebody saying here, communication, poor communication. So you're not getting what you need from the technology department or the HR department or the cataloging department, all of the different resources that are supposed to be a part of the project, but there's not clear communication on when those deadlines are, who's really responsible. Have you ever been in a meeting and it's like, I think we were making a decision to do something, but it's not actually clear on who's doing it or when they're doing it? That becomes the unclear roles and responsibilities. And you know what happens when there's no clarity? That's the gray area that people love to swim in and say, not my job, it wasn't assigned, and all of that. Unrealistic targets and deadlines. I need this yesterday. Honestly, it's going to take at least 2 weeks to even gather everything that we need. So being able to realistically identify how long some task will take is going to help to avoid some of those pitfalls. No budget. There's no money for it, but you have to invest in some of the things that you're going to need to get the project done. Lack of delegation, and I put scope creep at the bottom because I want that to be a word that we all use and recognize. And the reason I start with these common pitfalls is because as you are planning your project, if you can keep some of these pitfalls in the back of your mind that they may be occurring, you can then turn around and say, wait a minute, I'm noticing something. We don't have everything identified in the project plan. We don't have a clear communication plan for how we're going to be able to say, this is what we've done, these are the next steps, and these are the milestones. So if you keep some of these are some of the things that can make a project go off track in the back of your mind, then as they start to occur, you are better prepared to address them, avoid them, or hit them head on and be able to communicate with others on your team that, hey, we're running into this thing and I'm trying to mediate a risk a little bit ahead of time. Does anybody have anything else to add to this? I think we had a really good list from everyone in the chat as we were starting up, but does any of this resonate? Have you seen some of these appear when you were in projects? I really wish this was a meeting. Yes, says Joyce. Definitely. Yes. Yep. Janice. Yep. Yes. All of it, says Michelle. Yep. Preaching to the choir. All right. So here are scope creep, definitely. Veronica says yes. Avis says yes. Okay, so we all know it exists. So how do we try and present it? That is where the project management process comes in. Incompetent folks get assigned to the projects. Yeah, and I call them the high school projects. You know, the group projects we all had in high school where there were 5 people on the team and it was like, oh, please don't let them be on my team. And then it ends up being we present, but it was me doing all of the work. Or someone who just isn't able to identify all of the tasks. Or the people that need to be on the team are missing for sure. And so that is where the importance of the project management process. I do take one of the steps out of it just because none of my projects ever require it. Same thing in grad school, unfortunately. Yep, it happens. I still haven't found a solution for that. So let's look at some of those project management components, because the way you start, a mentor told me this a very long time ago. The way you start off is the way you finish in life, really. Well, not really. But the way you start off in a project is the way you finish. So if you start off haphazardly, it's unorganized, there's no system to it, you're probably going to end that way. So let's take a look at some of these phases. So we started talking about going from idea to actual execution. So that very first stage of a project is that conception and initiation. And there is where you're typically doing, and the terms can change, but that's really where you're chartering it and saying what it is at a high level. You're not as detailed there. It's where you're getting the buy-in that what you want to do is important, or this particular thing that you've been assigned. This is the general idea of what we're trying to accomplish. And then you're initiating it by getting that proper sign off from either supervisors, managers, other people on your team. Because one reason why a lot of things break down is, like someone mentioned a moment ago, you don't have the right people on the team. So as you're coming up with that idea of how we're going to be able to achieve this particular project, identifying those critical players that need a seat at the table and should be a part of the team for actually getting the work done, and then clearly articulating to them what the expectation is of them. Because sometimes, have you ever heard the term Racy? RACI. I should have included this in the presentation. It is. I'm going to put it in the chat. Has anybody ever heard the term Racy? Racy is an acronym for who's responsible, who's accountable, who needs to be consulted, and who needs to be informed. So as you are starting out in that conception and initiation phase, you want to figure out, okay, who has overall check mark power to be able to say yes or no, this is a go. And also maybe has some political power where you are to be able to help push through some roadblocks that may come up. So that's the person in the R role for Racy. They're responsible for being able to do those things. Accountable is for all of the tasks that need to happen within a project. So who are those individuals that are accountable for the things? So as you are, and this is just in your brainstorming stage of conception and initiation. So when you're thinking about accountable, they are your doers, the ones that when you leave out of that meeting, they have tasks that they're accountable for to either report back on, get done, research, whatever it needs to be, but they're the ones in the A position. The C in Racy stands for consulted. So they may not actually be the ones that are doing the things or responsible for moving the project forward, but they're the ones that you're going to consult because they have either some history to know why it worked or why it wouldn't work, or they have connections, or they just have a level of expertise that you can tap into to make the project easier. And then the I is informed. Who needs to be informed about it? Like there's no action from them. They're not really an expert, but it's probably going to impact them some way. Like you're considering a new system for your department. And you want to kind of consult your IT department, but you may not need to consult your HR department so much, but you want to inform them because it may impact others in the company or in the library. So you want to keep all of those things in mind as you are in that conception and initiation phase. Once you've gotten the green light that this project is a go, that's when you get detailed. That's when you get to the point where you are creating that project plan. And haste makes waste in this point. I know it can be painstaking to try and think through all of the things that could negatively impact your project, but you want to consider what truly is the scope. What are we trying to achieve at the end of this particular project? And most importantly, do we have a budget? Because if somebody says we have a budget, you need to turn around and then say the famous line, show me the money, for you to be able to do those things. Because as you get into it, and they've agreed to it early on, but then as you're going through and you're starting to turn in those invoices, you want to make sure that you have sign off on what the budget is and what it is that you're attempting to accomplish. Once you have that overall picture of what it is that you want to accomplish, then you're thinking about the work breakdown schedule. And that's where you're going to put your Racy next to all of the things that need to happen. And if it doesn't show up there, when it starts to show up later, scope creep. Or maybe we didn't consider all of the things that we needed. So is there someone else that needs to be on the team? And I typically do my work breakdown structures initially on just a piece of paper. There's something special about writing things out where you can kind of think in chunks. So for the first part of this project, we want these people involved, and it's going to take these specific things. And you also want to consider by when. Remember SMART goals, that's another thing. So you have Racy and you have SMART goals. Everybody knows the SMART goals, but I'm going to say them out loud because we're not in meeting. But that is specific. So you want to be as specific as possible with every task that you're creating. You want it to be measurable. So was it done or wasn't it? There should be no gray area when you are identifying a task. Did you email it or didn't you? Did you print it or didn't you? Did we create it? Do we have a marketing plan? Yes or no kind of things. Specific, measurable, attainable. Is it actually something that you can do, right? Is it within reach? Is it within scope with the timeline that you have? Is it realistic? And then time bound. By when? For every task that you have, there should be a due date associated with it. Because then as you start to see, well, wait a minute, we have these 15 things that are due in 7 days, and it's only accountable to one person who also has these other 50 jobs that they're doing. That's probably not realistic. So to save yourself the headache that's definitely going to come later on, looking at that holistically before you go into a system. We haven't even talked about a system yet. This is just you sitting down with a piece of paper and really thinking through, what does it really take for us to achieve this? What are the various tasks that we need? And then the timeline that it's going to take. Gantt charts are another thing that you can use, and I'll show you those in the tools. And that just kind of puts all the tasks right along each other, and you start to see where they start to align with each other. Communication plan. How are you going to communicate with everyone? Is it going to be email? Are you going to have weekly meetings, bi-weekly meetings? Are you going to be turning in reports? Because if you set that up at the beginning, right? If you set it up at the beginning, you're putting it on your calendar at the same time. So you're establishing a cadence that we're going to meet on a bi-weekly basis for a check-in. It's no surprise to anyone. And then I'm someone who is driven by deadlines. Sometimes it depends. But when I know that I need to report out on a certain day, not only am I accountable for the task, but I know I have to have it done by then. So if you also kind of create that calendar ahead of time, where every calendar now you can set it to weekly, bi-weekly, every Thursday, every third Thursday, whatever you want. But make that a part of when you are doing the definition in the planning phase. And then the risk management. So where are those danger zones that you see? where you've had history in the organizations that you work at, right? So you know that typically when somebody tries to implement a new idea, who are those people that say it'll never work? Make them one of your consultants. Have them tell you why it won't work, right? So try and work around those naysayers, or somebody just never is ready when it's time to do their report out. Try and have a meeting with them beforehand to figure out, is there any assistance you can give them? Is there someone else that can do it in their place? So kind of thinking about your experience in the projects and the people that you've worked with helps you to really think through some of the challenges that can occur. The next thing is the launch and the execution. That's when you're actually doing the work. It's fun planning and thinking of all the people you're going to delegate to, because you don't necessarily have to do it. Then you find out that you do have to do it. But it's really the rolling up of your sleeves and getting the work done at that point. And so that's where you have those either. I would always recommend, as you are starting a project very early on, to keep that momentum, at least doing weekly status checks on, this is what we thought we would achieve, this is what we were able to achieve, and then how can we shift it a little bit for the next time. And then quality control. Just because people are doing it doesn't mean they're doing it right. Somebody said something earlier about incompetent people being on the team or to lead. I hope you don't have an incompetent person leading, but sometimes that's just the way of the world. Being able to have checks and balances in place is so important. And then once the project is done, once all of the work is done, the project closeout, that is officially saying we set out to do X, Y, and Z by this particular date. It is now March the 30th, right? So let's say it's March 30th. And we said that this project would be done by March the 30th. If you are still doing items after March the 30th, that means that the project has extended beyond its original timeline, and you need to go back to whoever it is that you're reporting to and renegotiate that, because remember, a project has a defined start and end date. A punch list. So if it's something that will become operational, so you've implemented a new process or a new way of doing things, then you want to have a punch list so that someone coming behind you knows all that hard work that you put into putting this new thing into place, is able to operationalize it. And then report out. What did you learn? What can be improved? And what are the expected gains from doing it? So any questions or things in terms of the phases of project management that were either surprising, you knew them, or hey, I never thought about it that way, before I go on to some of the tools that will help you at least with the work breakdown schedule. Most of what I'm going to show you in the tools area are going to help you in the definition and the launch phase. Sure, absolutely, Michelle. So a punch list is really that standard operating procedure. So if you have put in a new process for, let's say, checking out books, right? In order for that project to be effective, you want to make sure that whatever the processes are the new processes that you've defined, the task list that people have to do, is written out in a way that someone else who's coming behind you doesn't have to start a new project to figure it out. Does that help? Yes, documentation. But they say punch lists, and I wanted to make sure I was consistent with them, with the Project Management Institute. So I don't see any other questions. So I'm going to get to the good stuff. But before I get to the good stuff, I always like to say, it's never, ever about the tool. Never. The tool is just something that enables you to do all of the other things. And some of us get so wrapped up and hyped up into what the system can do for us that we spend time just building in this system. And I want to caution against doing that, because that's going to take you further off of achieving the goal for the project. If you don't do the initial nitty-gritty things of really thinking through the project, who your resources are, what the scope is, it's just another database. It's just another database. What about the long-term sustainability? Does that fall under the definition and planning phase? It should. Like, you really want to think holistically about, why are we doing this project, right? Like, why are we even saying, yes, this is something we want to do? Is it a Band-Aid where we just got to get through COVID? Well, those Band-Aids are bleeding now because we're almost a year in and we're still getting through COVID. So really being able to articulate the why behind what it is that we're doing in the project becomes so imperative. So imperative. But that was a great question. All right, so are we all clear? It's not about the tool. The tool is shiny. I'm a shiny object person. I think that's why they hired me as the organizational director, because I get to play with all the tools. But really hone in on defining your project and your resources before you hop into the tools. All right, so the first tool that we're going to look at is Trello. Trello, they all offer a free option, but all free options come with an option to upgrade, and all of the shiny things that you don't necessarily need, but it just makes it cooler that you have them, are there. So Trello, this board that we're looking at here, I just created 3 different boards in the 3 systems we're going to show today. Trello is it starts with templates. Oh, Monica loves Trello and she uses all, listen. So one of our own is giving us the green light that Trello is amazing. Thank you, Monica. So the thing about Trello is they have templates. So what if you are like, I don't even know the different parts of the project or how to do the tasks? There are several templates that they have available. It really helps in the sense of task list. I use it now. It's helped me with projects and personally, says Evan. We use it to organize our monthly projects in her department. And thank you. I agree. I thank you for that, Monica. All right. So it allows you to do different task boards. And we're going to go into Trello in a moment. And then what the homework is, if you see that this particular view works for you, I want you to at least sign up for a Trello account and explore some of the additional features, because they have something called Butler in there that creates rules and automations for you. So we're going to take a look at that. I did create an example board, and this is it here. And so as you can see, what it does is it creates different, I call them task boards, but within each board you can have a card. And these cards, remember, we've set up what all of our tasks are. So if there was one major chunk, then that chunk would be the name of all of these cards. And then all of the cards become the tasks that you have to take. So schedule bi-weekly check-in meeting. Now there's more to it. If you click the 3 dots, you can say who needs to be assigned to this particular one. So who else is on your team? So if there's other people, you can say this particular task is assigned to John Doe. And when I press enter, look what happens. All of detail is your friend. And if you're I'm not a very detail oriented person. And if you know that that's a weakness of yours, find somebody who's detailed. Some people love to go into the details. So here is where you can get specific. What's the description of that particular project? You can add labels to it. So is there something specific or a way that you're organizing your projects? You can put that there. There are also checklists. And the beauty of checklists is they can be reused. You can make one checklist for every time we do a specific thing. We want to do these 6 things. And then you can associate that checklist with every card that's associated with it. You can add attachments. So did someone give you a draft of how we should be reporting out on the project? Add that as an attachment. Now, there are 2 other ones, but it's just not enough time in a 1-hour meeting. But this is where the power of Trello comes in. So you have your boards where you can say when things are due. You can organize them based on the different portions of the project that they have or the different milestones. But then there are these concepts of power ups. Now, power ups give you a way to maybe associate it with a Google Drive, send automatic emails. There's typically what I've used. This looks a lot like MS Planner, which we use at work. They're all similar. Let me repeat that. All of these systems are, I don't want to call them identical because they're not identical, but some, depending on how you like to look at your projects, you may prefer MS Planner over Trello. This one is just available in the cloud, and they also have an app that goes with it. But there are several tools, but a lot of these I would stay away from because normally they have subscriptions that go along with them. But the idea is it powers up your task management. Let me go back to this one. That's not what I want. Why won't you let me go? Right here. All right, so if I open up another card again, so this one has, this was copied from the template. You can also put like a cover, so you see how they had like that silly cat over there, so that it just kind of livens up your page a little bit. And then you can also make it a template. So sometimes when we delegate, it's remembering to go back and check on the person. Like, I've done it. Delegation isn't here, you do it. Delegation is here, you do it, and then you also go to confirm that it's been done. A lot of times it's getting it off our plate and just it's out of the way. You can actually watch this particular item. And so that way, as people are updating it, they can have notes here in the comments, and you would be updated about those as well. Inspect what you expect. I'm going to have to copy that. Is that Gail? I am going to copy that and mark it in my memory, because I am guilty of, my version of delegation is here. You said you know how to do this, and then a week later I find out either it wasn't done or it just wasn't done correctly. So learn from that and use Gail's inspect what you expect whenever you are delegating something. The other one that is a really nice feature is this Butler. And what Butler does, there's not a lot of activity. What it does is it automatically starts to see what are the routines that you have when you are on your boards. And what it'll do is it'll start saying, well, you always assign things like this to Jane. Do you want me to automatically do it? And there becomes a button that you can press. And it's basically like ringing a bell, and the Butler does that thing electronically. But you can also set up rules. So you can say, just create a rule, and then you add triggers to it. So anytime somebody moves a card or updates the status of a card, or a date is passed, or a checklist is completed, you can have it do specific things. Again, scope creep, it's out of the scope of this particular meeting, in this workshop. The goal is just to kind of give you some tools that you can use, and hopefully, if you're interested enough, you will go away and look at the YouTube tutorials for them. Maybe just get a free trial of it. All of them have just free versions, and then there's upgrades, like I mentioned. But the idea is, it starts to make you think, maybe I could use that in doing my projects. So these are the different options that you have within Trello. Are there any questions about creating a Trello board, creating task cards, or how you would use them? Is there anybody here who hadn't heard of Trello or used it? Oh, no, I hadn't. Yes, never heard. Okay. Well, hang on to your computer screens, because we had two more. No to me. We use it at our library blog. Haven't used it in years. I've never used it. Didn't know it existed, but it looks so useful. I had the free version of Trello, but stopped using it. And I have had it as well. Sometimes I allow the tasks to just build up, because sometimes it just feels good to get it, like do a brain dump of, these are all the things that I need to do, but I wasn't using it for project management. It was really for task management. Guilty, right? What are you currently using? Well, I use a different tool. It's called Plutio. That's definitely out of the scope. I use Plutio now because it has my invoice tracking in there. It has my proposals, my calendar. So it does more than the project management. If you want to see that, I can show you that. But because this is recording, I can't show you on recording. It is not free. It's $9 a month. Darn it. I know, Bradley. But I have used all of these. That's why I'm bringing them up. And they have free versions for you to use. Airtable does something. Yes, Airtable is another one, Shakim. Absolutely. Yep. All right. So let's come back here and let's see what else we got. So we looked at Trello. Here's another busy slide. And this one is Asana. This is great for beginners because one thing that I don't necessarily like about Trello is it can get busy. Please click on all panelists and attendees. I think we are missing comment. Oh, yes, thank you for saying that, Veronica. The default when you come into webinar is that it's only coming to me and everybody else is kind of just seeing the cricket choir singing in the chat. So if you can click on the two and make sure that it's saying panelists and attendees, that way everyone will see. And the beauty of that is someone may have a tip that you may not, or you may enter a question and they may see it and be able to respond. Thanks for that, Veronica. I didn't even, I appreciate it. So with Trello, there are several, if this may not be your jam, right? This may not be the way you want to look at your projects. You might want it a little more organized. Well, that's where Asana comes in. Asana has several views, and we're going to go into one of these as well. And it's Asana. It walks you through setting up your project. If you started out with that project plan and those critical tasks. So let's go here so we can take a look at what Asana looks like. So when you first come into Asana, remember we were saying our Racy, you would say who those roles are. Who are the people that are a part of this project, right? So it kind of lays it out for you. Additionally, what are some of the key resources? Create a project brief and then add links. So some people will say, well, where is that on the shared drive? Or where is that particular file? Everything that people need to constantly access, you make it available in one place. And then when we were talking about those SMART goals, put them down here. We said that by March the 1st, we will have this project initiated. We said by June the 1st, we would have it closed out. Now, hopefully, they are not your only two goals and milestones. We're starting and ending. Where's all the work that has to happen in between? You want to have that captured as well. So that's not all. That's the overview. But then what it does is it create lists for you, or it doesn't create them. You enter all of the items for the task or for the project in here. And as you are doing that, you can associate a due date with it. You can give it a priority. And then you can also say the status of it. Are we on track? Is it at risk? And so somebody just hasn't attended any of the meetings for the last 3 weeks. This particular element may be at risk. So it gives you a bird's eye view of being able to see where all of the tasks are that you have. And unfortunately, when you first, let me see if I can start a new board so you can see. Let's see. When you create, and this is what I mean by it steps you through setting up your project. So what is this project? Webinar demo. Who's the team? Well, I'm a team of one, and this project should be public to everyone. Then it's asking you, what is your preferred way of viewing your projects, like your day-to-day tasks that are happening? Do you want to see it in a list view? Do you prefer to view it in a board view? So this is similar to what we saw in Trello, but this is how this steps away from Trello. It's giving you the same features and functionality, but it's just dependent on how you prefer to take in the information. So do you want it to separate it in boards? Yes, that's correct, Michelle. Everybody would have to have an account. And if you're doing team accounts, that's typically where the cost comes in. You also have a timeline view. So this is almost similar to a Gantt chart, but don't tell anybody in true project management that you have a Gantt chart with this. But it operates the same way. It will align all of your tasks so that you see who's doing what along a timeline. So you can kind of keep your eye on the pulse or your finger on the pulse of where everything is and who's doing what. Additionally, there's a calendar view so you can see really quickly, okay, we're in this week. I need to be talking to this person and this person, or I'm the one that's accountable for this project, and these are the two things that I have due. Have I allocated time? Because that's something that I would often struggle with my projects. I would set those due dates and there would be like something due every day. When did you set aside time to do the work of accomplishing those things that you've set a due date for? So keep that in the back of your mind as you are setting the due dates for your projects, because you have to bake in time for when the work is actually going to be done. It's good to know when it's due, but when are you going to do it? So we're going to keep it in the list view because we can always switch it. And then it starts to tell you, go ahead and start adding your tasks. If your org library has an enterprise team account, Trello and Asana are add. I did not know that. Joyce has given some great information to everyone. So both Trello and Asana, right? So then you could fill in your tasks. So create schedule or create project plan. Create Racy. Research Trello and Asana, right? And the reason we're doing that, because maybe this particular project is, my project is by the end of March, I want to have a solid understanding of my project management and decide on a tool that I will use by March 30th, right? So that's what this particular project is. And then there's details. Who are we assigning this to? Well, Zakia, you're a party of one, so you're assigning it to yourself. And then it also requires, it doesn't require you, but it's a great practice to put your dates in, right? So as we're putting our dates in, it's building our schedule, right? And there we have the things that we need. You can also add new sections and you can call it whatever you want. So maybe that's a different phase of the project, right? Or a different milestone. But you can always change your view in Asana. So if we want to look at it from the board view, it'll just put it in the different orders there. If you want to see what it looks like on a timeline, right there, it'll show you those people who have been assigned. If you want to see the calendar view, it shows you that. You also get a dashboard for what has been completed and visualize all of the things. So sometimes we may be a little bit burned out, right? So this would be a good way to see, well, do I have too much on my plate? Because if I look at this dashboard and I see I have 17 items that are due, and I'm still trying to do my day job aside from this project, is there an opportunity to delegate or renegotiate what the project is? There's also messages available in here, but again, it only works if you are on a team. You can also create forms. So if you need people to submit information for you, instead of getting a million email messages, create a form, share that, and then people can upload that information and you have a single repository instead of trying to search through your email of who said what when. And then there are additional ones where you can load files as well. So that is the Asana version of a tool that you can use to manage your tasks and the deliverables that you have for your project. It's a great idea to separate them into different buckets. So for each bucket of tasks that you have, you want to have a specific milestone that you can say, have I checked off all of those things that's moving me closer to completion of the project and not creating more scope creep. So that is Asana. Any questions about Asana, or does anyone here currently use Asana? Never heard of it, never used it. Alrighty. Well, you got one more for your research. And Ashlyn is a supporter. She loves it. First time hearing of it. Okay, well, you got another tool in your tool belt. You do not have to use any of them. It's just what I want you to see as you are looking at these is, do you currently have a way of managing all the tasks that you need to complete for your projects? And do you have a way of really seeing the entirety of what it is that you have going on for the project? If you have several people that are working on it, do you know who's working on it? Have they delivered on the things by those due dates? That's where these systems help, just for maintaining a sense of where you are with the projects. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, Janice. I'm that makes me know it was all worth it. All right, and last but not least is Notion. And I left this one last because it can be extremely overwhelming, but once you unlock the power of it, it becomes a truly powerful tool. It can even serve as a website. So we're going to go to Notion. It's an all-in-one solution. Not only does it have boards, but you'll see in just a second. This also has templates. This is a project management template that I pulled. You have your project summary right at the top, what we've been talking about before. Then you have a place where you can store all of the documents for the project. You also have a place where you can say who the different members of the project team are. And then it goes as far as saying, okay, what are we even trying to achieve? It walks you through those things. What's the problem that we're trying to fix? How are we going to measure if it's successful? That's a great way when someone says, hey, Janice, I have this great idea. I think you would be great on this project. And then my question is always, how are we going to know we were successful? If I do all this stuff and we actually do it, how are you going to measure if it's successful? Because that's a great way for when you're doing your post mortem at the end of the project. Did you hit that? Not all the tasks that you checked off, but what was the problem you were trying to solve, and how is that success going to be measured? And clearly stating what's in scope and what's out of scope. And then remember, we talked about those risks a little earlier. So saying and clearly articulating and thinking through what are some of the things that we could bump into. Now, the reason I say this can be a little overwhelming is all of these are pages within Notion. So when I click on pre-planning, that's taking me to another section where it's, oh, problem to solve. So if you're very detail oriented and you want to be able to track all of those elements, Notion is the place to go. But it does take, if you're looking for a complete system, Notion is the way to go. If you're looking for task management and just managing your deadlines and your deliverables, I would say go with Trello or Asana or any of the other ones that you have seen and used. Um, so these typically are able to be done using templates, or you can start from a blank document. I kind of like starting from templates because then I can just fill it in and then set a match to those. And when I say set a match, I mean just delete the things that I don't want. But on here, there is a project plan. So very similar to what we saw on Trello, where we can add in those individual tasks, task 1, task 2, and these are just lists. So very similar to what we saw in the other ones. Additionally, there is the timelines. So this is showing you what you have said your discovery phase is, or your conception phase, your implementation, all of those you can list out here, and you can update the status on if it's in progress, completed. But this is very modular, whereas the other ones are, because I've checked off all of these things, the system knows that it's been completed. And then there's also a place for you to keep track of those meeting notes. So what happened in those meeting notes? Did Gary say over and over again, I'll have it next week, I'll have it next week? Has Janice been a rock star the entire time and every time she's delivering her stuff? I don't know about you, but one thing I have learned is documentation is key. What happened and who did it? And this is a great way of being able to keep those all in one place. Again, getting out of the email loop of trying to search through and stay organized with everything. This is putting it all in one digital briefcase, if you will. You also have meeting notes. There's a template in here that you can use. So if you're somebody that's not really particular about having an agenda, well, this helps you to kind of get a little bit on track with what you want to accomplish there. So you can put your date, who participated. You can add an agenda, some notes, and what were those key actions, not just what they were, who's doing them, and by when. For any time you leave a meeting, if no gray area after a meeting, who and when is what you need to know. And if it's you, it's going on your task list. So that is Notion. Okay, so here are some important reminders. Um, Always, if there's anything that I hope you walk away from with this session today, is always define your projects up front with detail, your project plan, and any agreed upon deliverables. So, what is it that is supposed to be at the end of your project? Manage your tasks, your subtasks, because sometimes there's some dependencies. Like, I can't do this until this is done. So who needs to do that thing by when? Because if this has a due date that's after the one that's ahead, you're already behind the eight ball. So make sure you're managing those things and clear on what needs to come before, how much in advance. And then I know it's so hard, especially when we're working, to say no, right? Um, but no is a complete sentence. And if you need to give additional information, you can ask for more resources for those things, because people will try to pile on. And when you don't say no, what ends up happening is it becomes unmanageable. And if it doesn't become unmanageable, you become less than happy, or less energized on what it is that you're trying to do, because we've all been a part of those high school and grad school projects where it was a we that turned into me, and it just feels like it just grows so much. Whereas if we're vocal enough at the beginning to say, well, we go back to our project plan, where does this fit in the scope? Because you have that. And if it doesn't fit in the scope, we need to renegotiate some deadlines. And then keeping those lines of communication open with everybody you've identified on that Racy, right? So these things are going a little bit off track. We might need to increase it by 2 weeks. The people who are in your consultant, if they see some red flags, making it okay for them to tell you, and not put up a shield when someone says, hey, I think there's another way we should do this. Be open to that, in those lines of communication. And I do have some additional resources if you are somebody who just needs to know all the ins and out of project management. PMI.org is the organization that they even have a PMBOK, which is the Project Management Book of Knowledge, that has breakdowns for each of the components or the stages of project management. Here are the 3 websites for Asana, Trello, and Notion. And of course, a number one resource for other professional development workshops is BCALA.org. And I'm Zakia, so we have about 6 minutes. I tried to make sure that I was going to have you out of here on time. So I will open it up for questions or anything that I didn't answer, or anything along those lines.